All right, good morning. I've been informed that we can begin, and if we need to make any changes because of the situation in Israel, we will do so. So welcome to today's side event entitled Roadmap to Accountability, Breaking the Cycle of Impunity for Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Across the Globe, or CRSV. My name is Richard Horowitz, and I am the representative of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, the IJL, to the United Nations in New York. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Permanent Mission of the Czech Republic to the United Nations, the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, the DINA Project at the Rachman Center of Bar-Ilan University, WIZO, the Women's International Zionist Organization, JurFem, the Ukrainian Women Lawyers Association, the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and the American Jewish Committee. Despite the growing recognition of CRSV, accountability mechanisms remain inadequate, particularly in cases of mass atrocities where identifying individual perpetrators is challenging. The objective of today's cited event, therefore, are to present the key findings and recommendations of the DINA Project's book on CRSV and the IJL's related legal activities, alongside case studies from Ukraine and other countries, to raise awareness about the use of sexual violence as a deliberate weapon of war, to discuss innovative legal and evidentiary frameworks to address CRSV, and to discuss diplomatic, legal, and policy actions to strengthen accountability mechanisms for CSRV. The program will have three parts. First, opening remarks from some of our sponsors. Second, we will hear a presentation by Shiran Mlamdowski-Somech, founder and CEO of Generative AI for Good. And finally, a panel discussion moderated by Rahil Reza, President of Council for Muslims Against Anti-Semitism and the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. The programs will be followed by a reception where the program speakers will attend and will be available to answer any questions you may have. Our first opening remark will be given by His Excellency Jakob Kulhanek, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Czech Republic to the United Nations in New York. Ambassador.
Hope it's on. Well, thank you, Richard. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome you today to the permanent mission of the Czech Republic to the United Nations. And I cannot possibly say how happy I am that we are hosting this event with our distinguished partners. We are meeting on the sidelines of the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, which this year highlights the importance of strengthening access to justice for all women and girls. In that regard, addressing conflict-related sexual violence remains one of the most urgent challenges facing the international community. Sexual violence in conflict is never incidental. It is often deliberate, systematic, and used as a tactic of war, terror, and repression. It shatters lives, tears apart families, and traumatizes communities. Its impact extends far beyond the immediate victims, leaving deep and lasting scars across generations. Conflict-related sexual violence continues to occur in conflicts across all regions of the world. The circumstances may differ, but the patterns are tragically familiar. This is not an isolated phenomenon. It is a global challenge, and it demands a sustained international attention, stronger cooperation, and genuine accountability rooted in international law. The United Nations has developed an important normative framework to address this issue. The Women, Peace and Security Agenda, beginning with Security Council Resolution 1325 and strengthened by subsequent resolutions, which clearly recognizes conflict-related sexual violence as a matter of international peace and security. These resolutions call for accountability, for the protection of survivors, and for the prevention of future crimes. These resolutions have also established mechanisms for monitoring analysis, and reporting. Importantly, the Security Council recognizes conflict-related sexual violence as a designation criterion under UN-sanctioned regimes, making it possible to impose targeted measures against perpetrators. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, despite these commitments, impunity remains far too common. Sadly, recent years have given us far too many horrific examples. And one of the most appalling was the large-scale weaponization of sexual violence by Hamas terrorists against Israeli civilians on the 7th of October, 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion is intended as a space for reflection and honest dialogue on how to address conflict-related sexual violence more effectively and how to strengthen accountability. We are not here to offer simple answers, nor to advocate a single approach. Rather, we are here to ask difficult but necessary questions. How can legal frameworks evolve to address systemic patterns of sexual violence in conflict more effectively? How can national and international accountability mechanisms be strengthened? And above all, how can we ensure justice for survivors? By bringing together legal experts, practitioners, and civil society representatives, we hope to encourage a constructive and forward-looking exchange of views, while respecting the diversity of perspectives that shape the broader global discussion on how to break the cycle of impunity. So again, let me thank our partners and all the speakers for being here with us today, and I look forward to a rich and thoughtful discussion. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Our next remarks will be given by Professor Ruth Halpern Kadari, head of the Rachman Center at Bar-Ilan University and a founding member of the Dina Project. Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here. We are all aware that as we gather here today, during the CSW week at the United Nations, there is a war going on in our region, and we just witnessed the fact that we had to wait for a few minutes to see whether our partners in Israel can join us. We're still waiting to hear from them. We are acutely aware that people are getting killed and wounded. Our hearts go out to all the victims of the war. We pray and hope for peace and for a brighter future for the people of Iran. And yet, just as we did throughout the past 2.5 years, the work of the Dina Project at the Rachman Center, Bar-Ilan University, continues. And the legal and moral frameworks that we have built must stand independently. This side event is another milestone in our battle for recognition and justice for the victims of conflict-related sexual violence. For us, this battle started on October 8, 2023, when we all felt the same urgency of ensuring that those sexual atrocities of October 7, perpetrated by Hamas, cannot be erased. They must be recognized and condemned, and victims must receive justice. We took upon ourselves to be the voice for those who could no longer speak. Another milestone in our struggle, together with others working for this cause, was in August when the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres included Hamas on the blacklist of entities credibly suspected of using sexual violence as a weapon of war. This was just 1 month after we presented our book, A Quest for Justice, October 7 and Beyond, to him. I believe it is fair to say that in our short but intense existence, the Dina Project has moved beyond merely bearing witness to creating a rigorous, practical path towards accountability. We have achieved a lot, but there's a lot more to do, and we will hear about that today. It now gives me great pleasure to thank all those who have made this event today possible. Our partners in this endeavor, first and foremost, the permanent mission of the Czech Republic, Mr. Ambassador Jakub Kulanek, and sorry, I'm bad with names, and Petra Koplanova, relentless Petra Koplanova, that I managed that. To the International Association and the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, to World Zionist Organization WIZO, to the American Jewish Committee, to the Ukrainian Women Lawyers Association, ULFEM. Thanks to my own home university, Bar Ilan University, under whose auspices the Rachman Center and the Dinah Project are able to operate and to flourish. And I want to express special thanks to the participants of the panel, especially to my friend and role model in so many respects, Rahil Raza, who will moderate the panel. And above all, to my dear friends and colleagues on the Dinah Project, who are not able to be here today with us. Former Judge Nava Ben-Or, co-founder and also co-author of the book. Leah Guppinger-Levy, our Research Development Director. Nurit Jacobs-Yinon, who is here today with us, our amazing creative director. And most of whom, to the Dinah Project CEO Sharon Zagagi-Pinchas, who is going to join us virtually online, hopefully after she can get out of the bomb shelter. Without Sharon, nothing would have been possible. So thank you, Sharon, and thank you, all of you who are here with us today.
Thank you, Ruth. Now we'll hear from Anat Vidor, World President of WIZO, the World International Zionist Organization.
Shalom to everyone. We just ran out of the shelter. Thank you, Richard, for the introduction, and my deep appreciation to Ambassador of the Czech Mission for hosting us. It's an honor to speak immediately after you, Professor Ruth Alperin-Kadari. Ruth, you and your colleagues at the Dinah Project embarked on this critical journey because of a chilling realization. And our partners at IJL, thank you for tirelessly fighting the delegitimization of our right list in these UN corridors. I'm looking at this remarkable panel, Rahil's courageous voice against extremism, and Victoria and Erin representing the bleeding wounds of Ukraine and the DRC, and Emily's vital governmental perspective. I see a global alliance here. This fight against conflict-related sexual violence is indeed universal, but the reality of this conflict is not theoretical for us. Rushing out of a shelter is not to be taken lightly. It happens few times a day. But despite this agonizing pain, where I share a shelter with young kids, this war, we're ultimately fighting on behalf of entire free world against an extremist regime that openly declares its global ambitions. We're confronting a radical ideology that has committed horrific, systematic crimes against women for 47 years, and where there is absolutely no justice. While the UN Commission discusses legal framework for accountability, my organization, World WIZO, Women International Zionist Organization, is dealing with the shattered human reality. Today in Israel, Evacuated residents are beginning to return to their communities, but they're not just returning to homes, they're returning to their crime scenes. They're stepping back into the place where their loved ones were raped and slaughtered. We here in Witzo are treating a generation scarred by an unimaginable trauma, who witnessed first, second, and third hand their daughters and sisters being subjected to the most barbaric sexual violence. And how did the international community respond to this trauma? Let us look at the facts. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the UN rightly reported over 113,000 cases. And in Ukraine, it swiftly documented sexual violence as a weapon of war. The world believed those women. The world recognized who paid the price. But when the victims were Israeli women, it took the UN nearly 150 days of silence, denial, and victim blaming before UN envoy finally released a report admitting there were merely reasonable grounds to believe what we already knew. Why the delay? Why the hesitation? The hypocrisy is institutionalized. Every single year, the UN General Assembly passes more documentary and condemn resolutions against Israel than against Iran, Syria, Sudan combined. We sit in forums discussing women's rights while regimes that systematically murder women simply for not wearing a hijab are welcomed on UN women's rights panels. Impunity does not just happen. It is enabled. It thrives when member states delay their condemnation based on geopolitical identity of the victims. We cannot break the cycle of impunity if our global outrage is applied selectively. But let us ask an even harder question. Even in the cases where the international community did immediately recognize the crimes, what actually happened next? Did the cycle of impunity break? Are the perpetrators facing justice? Have the orchestrators of mass rape in the DRC or Ukraine been held fully accountable? The answer is tragically clear: no. And this is our shared failure. Recognition without accountability is just empty paperwork. We sit in these rooms drafting roadmaps, but the international legal system is failing on all these women. It failed Israeli women by doubting them, and it fails Ukraine and Congolese women by recognizing them, but doing absolutely nothing to punish their attackers. Impunity thrives on selective outrage and toothless resolutions. If the world cannot unequivocally condemn and actively prosecute sexual violence everywhere without political caveats, then no women anywhere are safe. And our legal framework means absolutely nothing. Justice cannot be conditional. Before I conclude, I have one urgent request for everyone in this room. I urge you to stop the double standards, demand immediate, concrete accountability, including severe sanctions and blacklisting against any entity that weaponizes sexual violence, no matter who the victims are. Please, from Israel, Shalom and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you, Anat. And now we will hear from Sharon Banyan, Chief Executive Officer of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists.
Yeah, okay. So His Excellency Jacob Kulhanek, the Ambassador and the Permanent Representative of the Czech Republic to the United Nations, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, panelists, thank you for joining us this morning. I would like to begin by expressing our deep gratitude to the Permanent Mission of the Czech Republic to the United Nations for hosting this important side event. In particular, I will join Ruthie and thanks Petra Kaplanova, which, because of her professionalism and dedication, this event became reality. The IJL was founded in 1969 by some of the leading jurists of the 20th century, including Justice Chaim Cohen of the Israeli Supreme Court, US Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg, and Nobel laureate René Cassin, one of the principal architects of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. From its very beginning, the organization was established with a clear mission to mobilize the legal community in defense of human rights, the rule of law, and justice in international affairs. Today, our members, judges, lawyers, and legal scholars from more than 30 countries work in courts, international institutions, and civil society to confront some of the most pressing legal challenges of our time. One of those challenges, and perhaps one of the most difficult, is the persistent cycle of impunity surrounding grave human rights violations, including conflict-related sexual violence. Sexual violence in war is unfortunately not new. For centuries, mutilation and violation of the human body have been used as instruments of warfare. Conquering territory often meant conquering the bodies of women and girls. Yet in recent years, there has been a growing recognition that these crimes are not incidental acts of brutality, but rather systematic tools of terror, humiliation, and destruction of communities. For us, as a Jewish legal organization, this issue resonates at a particularly deep historical and moral level. Jewish legal tradition, going back thousands of years, places extraordinary emphasis on human dignity. The concept of kvod habriot, the dignity of every human being, is not merely a philosophical idea. It is a binding legal and moral obligation. In many ways, the modern laws of armed conflict echo the same principle captured in the well-known rule that the right of the belligerents to adopt means of injuring the enemy is not unlimited. But Jewish history also teaches us another lesson. Silence and denial can be as dangerous as the crime themselves. For centuries, Jewish communities experienced violence that the world preferred not to see, not to hear, and not to acknowledge. This is why the legal struggle for recognition, documentation, and accountability is so essential in breaking silence of denial. Yet recognition and documentations are insufficient. Despite the remarkable progress international law has made over the past decades, impunity remains a persistent reality, particularly in situations involving mass atrocities. We therefore need stronger and more effective legal tools, both international and domestic, to enhance accountability. Justice requires a coalition of legal experts, diplomats, and civil society leaders willing to confront denial and impunity wherever they appear. Only through such collective effort can we begin to bring a measure of justice to survivors. This is precisely why today's timely event is so important. It is also why our collaboration with such distinguished partners and experts from around the world, whom you will hear from shortly, is so meaningful. Conflict-related sexual violence is not a Ukrainian problem nor an Israeli problem. It is fundamentally a human rights issue. And although this discussion takes place within the framework of the Commission on the Status of Women, and many of our speakers today are remarkable women leaders, CRSV is not solely a women's issue. Men and boys are also victims, and the fight against such crimes is ultimately about protecting the dignity of every human being. Before I conclude, I would like personally thank our partner at WITSO, at the DINA project, and all the organizations who took part in this timely discussion. But most of all, I would like to thank Advocate Colonel Reserve Duty Sharon Zagagi-Pinchas, the director of the DINA project, who has been an extraordinary partner in advancing this initiative. As the world around us faces profound challenges and a war, I would like to conclude with a traditional Jewish blessing for peace. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, על כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל, ואמרו אמן. May the one who makes peace in the havens grant peace to us, to all Israel, and to all the inhabitants of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Our next speaker is Shiran Mlamdowski-Somech, founder and CEO of Generative AI for Good, who will speak on the topic, Hearing Their Voices, Amplifying Silenced Voices of Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Through Ethical AI, and she will present a short video on her work. Her work on AI has been showcased at numerous institutions, among them the United Nations, UN Women, NATO, the Israeli Knesset, and the Brazilian Parliament. Shiran? She will be speaking by
Thank you.
video.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here today in this room alongside people who have dedicated their work to one of the most urgent accountability gaps of our time. Just want to make sure that, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. But she can't hear us.
I just come back from our bomb shelter. Same as my colleague, due to the escalation with Iran. And I want to share with you what we are doing in generative AI for good. We give a voice to the voiceless. We leverage generative AI in a responsible and sensitive way to amplify the voices of survivors of gender-based violence without giving up their safety from, and we're working on the field of domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual violence. We call it the good deepfake. We work in the interaction of ethical AI and human rights. And those days, we are focusing on, especially on survivors of conflict-related sexual violence who want to testify but cannot afford to be seen. The Women, Peace and Security agenda rests on 4 pillars: protection, participation, prevention, and relief and recovery. In practice, those pillars can sometimes operate in tension with each other. A survivor wants to participate by testifying publicly, may be putting their own protection at risk. A survivor who is protected by staying silent may find herself removed from participation entirely. It can feel like a choice that shouldn't have to exist. This tension is what we set out to address. And from our experience, generative AI, while used responsibly and sensitively, can advance all of us simultaneously. Our initiative called Hearing Their Voices. A survivor who testify with their face risk everything: family rejection, stigma, state persecution, and more. A survivor who testified anonymously behind blurb screen or in writing lose emotional impact, and decision maker read those reports and they don't feel them. And this in that gap between data and empathy, accountability dies. In generative AI, we give a third option, one that does not force the choice. And here the dual use of the Gen AI, safety and accessibility. So through AI-generated avatar, a survivor can testify in her own words, in her own voice, while her face is protected. But protection is only part of what the technology does. It also acts as a mediator. It makes content that would otherwise be too raw, too graphic, too triggering, actually watchable, accessible to the people who need to act on: diplomats, prosecutors, policymakers, and the public. And this is a dual function we built into Hearing Their Voices, which we launched in the UN in Geneva last December. We have testimony from Syria, Ukraine, Israel, October 7th, the Yazidi community in Iraq and Rwanda, endorsed by 30 international organizations and tech companies. Example of our immediate impact. So one testimony went viral across Syria. Noor, an AI avatar of a Syrian Druze survivor. So what's happened next means far more than the viewers. The narrative around her shifted. She stopped being a source of shame for her family and community. She became a symbol of resilience. And new survivors came forward. For a small and conservative community, that was a real change. Everything we do is governed by 5 ethical pillars: transparency, consent, authenticity, safety, and non-discrimination. Transparency, it's not enough just to put a generic AI watermark on a video. We create a dedicated set of disclosure icons that are specific to what the technology actually did in each testimony. Because in our work, not everything is AI made. The survivor words are real, the voice is real, or in some cases, voice cloned. The face in the video may be an AI avatar, or it may be a real person who voluntarily lent her face. Those are very different, and the audience deserves to know exactly what they are seeing and why. So our icon identifies the AI avatar, lip sync, voice cloning, AI illustration, and certainly a dedicated icon explaining the reason: identity protection. Deathless icon is the most important one because it's reframed the AI use from a technical trick to a protective act. It's invite the viewer into the ethical logic of what they are watching. Consent, this is where the work gets a bit more complex. Consent is not just a checkbox at the beginning of the process. The survivor decides exactly what gets protected and what doesn't. Whatever her face is revealed or concealed, her words are always real. Her voice is real, or in some cases, a voice clone with her full consent. And those are meaningfully different choices, and she or he is the one who makes them. One survivor, for example, we worked with, completed her interview and then faced a decision she hadn't predicted. She decided she wants a real face to be revealed. And the traditional process would have required her to do the interview again with a professional photographer instead of a Zoom, like what we did in the first place, which means re-traumatization for her. And we were able to create a full testimony from a single headshot without refilming. So the technology protects her from having a reveal the story a second time, just to exercise a choice about how she wanted to appear. Because this is a survivor-centered design. And safety, one of the more important pillars. And this one I want to be precise about because it's easy to overclaim. The technology allows survivor to speak without revealing her face. And this is what it does. It does not guarantee her safety. No technology can make the promise. What it does is significantly reduce one of the most immediate and visible risks she faces, identification. And also the mental safety. We also work with therapists and translator present in the interview process, not as an optional support, as a core team member. So protecting mental health throughout the testimony collection is not negotiable. And these women or men and survivor are not sources. They're a human being making decision to share something that costs them enormously. And the process itself must reflect that. Authenticity. Every testimony is reviewed by international human rights experts, including specialized from the specific conflict region. That verify, they push back, they accountability layer in what separates ethical AI testimony from a deepfake manipulation. And non-discrimination. We work across conflict zone without a political hierarchy, like from Syria, Ukraine, Israel, Iraq, Rwanda, and now also Iran. And the framework is universal. Every survivor who comes to us deserves the same standard of care, regardless of where she is from or what harmed her. And last month, we are just honored to share that we won the first ever AI Impact Awards at the SIMA Award, the Social Impact Media Awards, representing participants from more than 140 countries, one of the most recognized ethical endorsements in global media. And today, I want to share about our latest testimony of a very brave survivor from Iran. A few weeks ago, we received testimony from a woman I will call Maral. She is 34 years old. She was arrested during the January 2026 uprising in Iran and subjected to systematic sexual violence by the representative of the Islamic Republic security forces. It is documented first-hand testimony of sexual violence used as a weapon of oppression against the Iranian people. And this was produced in partnerships with Iran House. This organization built a trust network that made it possible for Moral Voice to travel around the world. So after we released her testimony, it reached more than 1 million views in less than 48 hours. And this is close to 1 million people who can no longer say they didn't know. And the Women, Peace and Security Framework asks us to ensure women voices reach decision-making table. For Maral, this table physically, politically, and legally inaccessible. Not because she has nothing to say, because saying that without protection would cost her everything. Generative AI, used responsibly, remove that wall. She's already had a voice. She just made it safe to use. I would like you to hear her voice now. You can play the video.
In 2026, the streets of Iran filled with people demanding freedom. The regime answered with force. Tens of thousands were killed, and thousands of women, men, and children were subjected to severe sexual violence. As Iran stands at a turning point, the truth is breaking through. Maral is one of the voices emerging from within Iran, despite the risk. For her protection, her face was digitally altered by AI.
همه رو یادمه تیراندازی خیلی شدید من دستگیر شدم داخل یه دونه ون منو بردن هر کدوممون گروهی به صورت 7-8 نفری میبردن توی اتاق من فکر کردم میبرم فقط کتک میزنم 7-8 نفر ما رو بردن به صورت گروهی به همون تجاوز میکردن هم عربی صحبت میکردن هم از افغانستان بودن از اینایی که چشمای بادومی دارن که بعدها فهمیدم اینا گروه فاطمیونن هم ایرانی بودن 1 هفته این اتفاق افتاد اینم تاکید میکنم یادت نره که از همه اونا بزرگتر من بودن اینا گناه دارن اینا خیلی کوچولو وقتی در قوانین اسلام رو بخونی خب میگن توی قرآن گفت شده که اگر به جای حمله بکنن و پیروز بشن میتونن به زن و دخترها و حتی پسر بچه ها تجاوز بکنن و این حلاله میگفتن که شما غنیمت جنگی هستین حتی یه خانم گفت من متأهلم آقا من شوهر دارم میگفت تو حلالی به من زمانی که اومدم بیرون از اونجا تو بحران روحی شدیدی بودم بعد بحران روحی خیلی شدید من 2 بار تصمیم به خودکشی گرفتم اینو انجام دادم ولی هر شب تصمیمشو داشتم من به نظرم فقط برای اینکه غرور تو پیش خودت بشکنم خب پیش خودت خورد بشی چون به نظر من زمانی یه خانم خورد میشه که مورد تجاوز قرار بگیره من تجربهشو نداشتم ولی الان فهمیدم ولی نمیدونن که یه زن ایرانی اونقدر قویه شاید 10 بارم تصمیم به خودکشی بگیره ولی باز بلند میشه
Okay, Shiran, thank you. Now we will go to our panel, which will be moderated by Rahil.
I would like to close by thanking the Health Mission, the GINA Project, the International Justice League, Vito, and all the other hosts for hosting this important conversation, and everyone in this room for the work you do. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you, Shiran. We will now go to our panel, which will be moderated by Rahil Raza. In addition to being the president of the Council for Muslims Against Anti-Semitism and the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow, Rahil is the author of Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, and a recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal Service for Canada. She is an award-winning journalist, public speaker, activist for human rights, gender equality, and dignity and diversity. Rahil will moderate the panel and introduce the panelists. So Rahil, please.
Good morning, Excellency Jakub Kulhanek, distinguished guests and colleagues. It's an honor and a delight to be here with courageous women on the front lines. I've been asked to tell you that this event is on Facebook Live under the DINA project, so you can spread the word on that. We gather here at a critical moment for global justice because conflict-related sexual violence is not incidental. As the ambassador so rightly said, it's often deliberate and it's a war crime. And it's tragic that it's 2026 and we are here sitting and talking about sexual violence against women. You may wonder why I, as an observant Muslim woman, is so passionate about this cause, and I'll tell you why. I'm directly involved in this issue because there are some Muslim majority countries where sexual violence against women and men exists without conflict taking place. We saw what is happening in Iran, of course, but in Afghanistan and my own land of birth, Pakistan, sexual violence is codified, legalized, and sanctioned by distorted religious laws. And we heard from Manal what is happening in Iran. So in these countries, there is a lack of will to report these crimes, including forced and underage marriage, which with girls as young as 7 and 9 years old, which itself is a form of rape. These are the stories you never hear. The UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Iran, and as you just saw the proof of that, talked about systematic sexual violence and torture used as a state policy against both male and female detainees. Iranian women who are arrested and jailed for showing a speck of hair are raped in jail because they are told it's sanctioned by the faith and they will go to heaven. So they would rather die than be arrested. And remember, my friends, this is the playbook that the Hamas murderers of October 7th, the Hamas rapists took their cue from. This is the head of the snake, and this is where the instructions were coming from. And this is why the DINA project has direct relevance to my work, because we've seen the perpetrators have impunity. Impunity is not neutrality. Silence is not protection. This year's priority theme focuses on documenting the atrocities, strengthening access to justice for women and girls. They are parts of Muslim majority societies and in the Middle East where there is no justice at all. It remains out of reach for many survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Recognition without accountability is not justice. Documentation without prosecution is not deterrence. Today, we ask a difficult but necessary question. How do we make accountability attainable? We have a brilliant panel of speakers who will put this into context from both a social and legal perspective, and you all know and have heard that this discussion is anchored in the work of the DINA project. Earlier on, I was speaking with Ruth, my friend from the DINA project, and I mentioned to her that my two organizations work on the 3 E's, and she liked the idea. And the 3 E's are expose the problem, educate the masses, and empower for change from within. As women, that is what our mandate is. But we are at the first level. We have false media who won't even expose the problem. So how will we come to the second level? But you know what? You're all courageous women, and we will make it happen. So let me begin by introducing the speakers. Is Sharon ready to join us from Israel? Okay. The first speaker joining us from Zoom, on Zoom from Israel is Colonel Sharon Zagagi-Pinhas. She is the director of the DINA project and the former chief military prosecutor of the IDF. She's held numerous senior positions and prosecuted complex and high-profile legal cases during her 24 years of service in the IDF. So I am going to begin by welcoming Sharon, and then I will ask her a question. Sharon, do we have you online?
Yes.
I can hear something.
Yes, I'm online.
Okay.
I'm back here.
Hello. Sharon, my main question to you is that the DINA project was born out of the realization that traditional international legal frameworks often fall short when confronted with the sheer scale and systematic nature of sexual violence as a weapon of war, as we witnessed on October 7th. You've called for an urgent paradigm shift. Could you elaborate on the fundamental evidentiary and substantive legal barriers that currently hinder accountability for CRSV?
Thank you. Just shutting down myself just a second. Okay. So thank you for having me here. I'm glad to be here. Just a second, if you excuse me. Okay, I'm so sorry, but I heard myself double, and now I'm here. And I want to thank everyone that came to this event. I'm very excited for this event, and I was hoping to be with you, but unfortunately, due to the situation, my flight was canceled, and I'm here. But the fact that I'm here, and I was a few minutes ago in a bomb shelter, just proves that combat against conflict-related sexual violence is global. It's a global struggle, and we will fight it from everywhere. And even the state of war will not shut us down and will not silence our voices. And the DINA project, we always say, was born out of the ashes of October 7 and out of the ashes of the sexual violence that was committed on October 7. And ever since October 7, the sexual violence crimes that were committed were surrounded by silence and denial. And the silence and the denialism is still existing these days. And when we're looking on those who try to silence and try to deny that sexual violence happened in October 7, I think that we realize that they're using the exact barriers and challenges of conflict-related sexual violence as a tool to shut us down, as a tool to deny. Because conflict-related sexual violence is like sexual violence that is perpetrated against the individual. And I think this was one of the first insights that we had as a project. Some of us are former prosecutors. And we realized that if we're looking at things in the regular lens, then we're missing a lot, and everything leads to impunity. And we thought, as I said, I'm a former prosecutor, and also Nava Ben-O, which is a retired judge, she's also a former prosecutor. And we thought that we knew everything about sexual violence. But when October 7 happened, and we started to learn the subject and to learn from what happened on October 7, we realized that we understand nothing, because the phenomena of conflict-related sexual violence has very special characteristics that impedes the ability to get justice. And we try to map these challenges, and then we try to find a solution for these challenges in order to pave a path toward accountability. And in the beginning of our work, we created a platform, a unique platform that organized all open sources information regarding sexual violence that happened in October 7 and also in captivity. And we monitored all the information, and we analyzed it
in certain rubrics. And then we succeeded in mapping the most comprehensive picture of sexual violence that was perpetrated during October 7 and captivity. And just a little bit, just to mention, and not to get into the subject, but there are 23 first-hand survivors that testified on sexual violence that were perpetrated against them. One from the Nova Festival, and 22 return hostages that reported very sexual violence that was perpetrated against them, some of them very severe sexual violence. And there are over 17 witnesses that reported over 15 incidents of sexual violence that were committed during October 7 in various arenas. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And when we're looking at things, we need to understand why it is so difficult to get accountability for CRSV. And the first reason is that CRSV always causes an almost absolute silencing of witnesses, of the survivors, and of course of the victims. If we're looking at October 7, most of the victims were killed either during or after the sexual violence was perpetrated. And those who survived are under such trauma, severe trauma, that they cannot come and report what happened to them. And this is not unique just to October 7 and captivity, but to other arenas of conflict-related sexual violence where we see an almost complete silencing, either from shame or stigma or cultural reasons. And if we're looking at things like we're looking at sexual violence that is perpetrated against the individual, then we will never get witnesses to testify about what happened. And if we're looking at sexual violence that is perpetrated against an individual, then in most cases, the survivor or the victim knows the perpetrator. The attack occurs indoors and not outdoors. And the victim or the survivor can identify and link the perpetrator. But when we are talking about sexual violence that is used as a weapon of war, and especially in cases of mass attacks, and we see in many arenas around the world that sexual violence as a weapon of war is not committed just by individuals, but as a part of a mass attack. And in these cases, the sexual violence is perpetrated outdoors. And in these cases, sexual violence is perpetrated by a mass. And even if there is a survivor that survived, then he or she cannot testify and cannot link the perpetrator to the assault. Also, it is very difficult to prove premeditation when we're talking about sexual violence as a weapon of war, because perpetrators know that sexual violence as a weapon of war is always illegal, always not legitimate. So they tend to hide it. Because when you try to portray yourself as a freedom fighter, and people find out that you use sexual violence as a weapon of war, you can never again portray yourself as freedom fighter. So in many arenas around the world, we cannot find directives that includes directives to commit sexual violence. And if we're trying to find if we want to get accountability for these crimes, then we have to find solutions for this special characteristic. We have to find a path. And in the book by the Dina Project, we offer an innovative legal roadmap to get accountability. But I have to say, we're not trying to lower the bar, and we're not trying to use to get leniency or use lighter methods to get justice. We're using acceptable and reliable law theories and law theses in order to get accountability. We're not lowering the bar. We're just trying to find what are the special challenges, and then try to find in the legal solution how to get accountability for conflict-related sexual violence.
Thank you, Sharon. Much appreciated. I have a quick follow-up question. In the quest for global accountability, the DINA project's legal framework introduces a pioneering approach. Could you elaborate on this innovative universal framework and explain how viewing CRSV through the lens of joint perpetration offers a new path to breaking the cycle of impunity for aggressor forces? Okay, we'll go on to the next one. No problem. Okay. I'm now going to introduce Victoria Karpa. Victoria is Deputy Head of Ukrainian Women Lawyers Association, JURFEM, Head of the Center JURFEM Education, lawyer with a master's degree in human rights and their legal support. Victoria's key areas of interest and expertise are the implementation of survivor-oriented approaches in the justice system, thus ensuring justice for survivors. Victoria, I'll begin by asking you the first question, which is that Ukraine's experience over the past years offers critical lessons in the struggle for recognition and justice in real time. Could you share with us how your country has been navigating these horrific events? Specifically, what international mechanisms were established to support survivors, and how you have collaborated with international bodies such as the UN and its special representative to ensure that these crimes are addressed within a global framework?
Thank you so much. My greetings, distinguished speakers and guests. And first and foremost, I want to thank you organizers for this crucial dialogue, especially for Ukraine today. So the Ukrainian Women's Lawyers Association, URFAM, has been working for over 8 years to develop a gender-sensitive justice system in Ukraine for gender-based violence survivors, and especially last years for conflict-related sexual violence survivors. We work in the strategic litigation field, and currently we are supporting 77 cases of conflict-related sexual violence. And here we also have filed 2 complaints to the European Court of Human Rights against Russia related to the serious crimes. And one more data, in 5 of our cases, which are under our support, national courts have already passed verdicts against Russian military personnel, but all these verdicts were in absentia, so without the actual presence of accused. That is why today I want to share what access to justice is currently like for CRSV survivors in Ukraine at the national and also at the international levels, and what steps still need to be taken based primarily on our experience of URFAM. As you know, the war that Russia started against Ukraine has been going on since 2014. And war crimes have been happening since then and becoming especially widespread after February 24 or 2022 with the start of the full-scale invasion of Russia Federation against Ukraine. According to the data from the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, there are currently 392 recorded cases of CRSV, specifically 146 cases related to men and 246 cases related to women, and 22 related to children. But I want to stress, and please note that these numbers, they don't include military personnel who survived sexual violence, because this information today in Ukraine is confidential for security reasons. And for sure, we understand that this number doesn't show the true scale of the problem and will only continue to grow. We also must take into account the specific challenges faced by women survivors of CRSV in Ukraine. They are often in situation when stigmatization makes them keep quiet about what they've been through and just not report to law enforcement agencies. In addition, today in Ukraine, women, they worry that report of a crime could risk the lives and safety of their family members who are still in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine or in the captivity. And also, if you talk about challenges of survivors, in 2 of our cases, women survivors became pregnant as a result of CRSV, and they gave birth to the children. Our experience in working with survivors and analyzing criminal proceedings allows us to identify typical patterns that demonstrate the large-scale and systematic use of sexual violence against women in Ukraine and the presence of the coordinated policy of such behavior by Russian army. So we don't talk about some isolated crimes. We talk about coordinated policy because CRSV cases have been documented in various regions of Ukraine, first of all, that were or are still temporarily occupied by Russia Federation. Also, they were committed by different Russian military units, but with use of similar scenarios of committing such crimes and the similar forms of CRSV against Ukrainian women. So what does justice mean for CRSV survivors in Ukraine today? First of all, justice for CRSV survivors, of course, is a form of satisfaction. It's a form of recognition by state. It's a form of recognition by international community because it's about that survivors did indeed survive such a crime and they are innocent. And justice is also the realization, of course, of the guarantee of non-repetition. Since 2022, a lot has changed in improving access to justice for CRSV survivors in Ukraine. As you may know, changes were made to Ukrainian legislation to harmonize it with the Rome Statute. Also, survivor-centered approaches are now being used in the investigation process, and also coordination centers for witnesses and victim support were established under the Office of the Prosecutor General in Ukraine. However, work is still in progress, particularly on improving procedures for survivors in criminal proceedings. Also, as you may know, in May 2022, the government of Ukraine and special representative of the UN Secretary General Premier Patten signed the framework on cooperation in the prevention and counteraction of sexual violence in wartime. And what is very beneficial, the framework includes tasks grouped into 5 areas. EURFAM coordinates work in the 3rd area. It's about access to justice and prosecution. And also we provide expert assistance in the 5th area, reparations and compensation. As of today, state authorities, civil society organizations, international partners are working to implement the measures and tasks provided in the implementation plan for responding to CRSV cases. So it really provides for us, for Ukrainians, opportunities to coordinate our joint work in this field. So even today, we already have an updated implementation plan for the framework for 2026-2027. We also understand that justice for survivors in Ukraine is not about justice at national level. It's also about international accountability and recognition of these crimes on the international level, including proper prosecution by ICC, by the International Criminal Court. In July 2025, the European Court of Human Rights found the Russia Federation accountable for widespread and systematic violations of the European Convention of Human Rights in Ukraine between 2015 and September of 2022, including sexual violence as torture in the context of armed aggression. For us, it's also important to see fairness in not just judicial international mechanism as ECHR or ICC, but also in non-judicial international mechanisms. As an example, we, together with the Women CRSV Survivors-led organization, SEMA Ukraine and Numo Sestre, Numo Sisters, prepared a joint submission to the UN Special Reporter on Torture. And what is interesting, this submission presents testimonies of survivors and also perspectives of their legal representatives on the use of CRSV as a form of torture during the ongoing military aggression of the Russia Federation against Ukraine. And one more thing, today we mentioned that Hamas is in blacklist, And last year, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres released the conflict-related sexual violence report, once again confirming the fact that Russia systematically uses sexual violence as a tactic of war and a tool of a terror against Ukrainian civilians. 2 years ago, 2 years ago, I think it was in late 2024, the Ukrainian CRSV survivors, they wrote an open letter to the UN Secretary General asking him to insert Russia into so-called shame list due to the numerous CRSV cases. Last year, Russia was issued a warning, and it's a result. But this year, we continue to call on the inclusion of Russia in this shame list. The step also about justice, the step also about recognition of the fact that CRSV is systematic and must be publicly condemned at the highest level.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria. I believe Sharon is back online, so I have a follow-up question for her. Is Sharon there? Yes. Welcome back. Sharon, I have a quick follow-up question. In the quest for global accountability, the DINA project's legal framework introduces a pioneering approach. Could you elaborate on this innovative universal framework and explain how viewing CRSV through the lens of joint perpetration offers a new path to breaking the cycle of impunity for aggressor forces?
Thank you, Rahil. I'm back. I'm so sorry about before, but that's the repercussions of trying to speak during war. In the DINA project, in our book, we offer an innovative roadmap to get accountability, which is based on two major points. The first one, as I said, it's very difficult to try to link between perpetrator and victim or survivor, especially in attacks that are perpetrated by a mass. And we are offering to you a responsibility concept, which is an acceptable legal thesis, doctrine. We know, as I said, that in different arenas around the world, when there is an attack of CRSV, sometimes and mostly it's done by a mass. In a lot of arenas, CRSV is a part of genocide. We know that in many places around the world, when there is an attack that is aimed at genocide, CRSV is part of it. And when a mass joins the attack, people joining the attack willingly and knowingly, that the aim of the attack is genocide, is dehumanization, and the indoctrination under the attack is dehumanization and genocide, then by the legal doctrine of joint responsibility, all people that join this group, knowingly, when they choose to join this group and they know what this group aims to do, everyone can and should be held responsible for everything that's been done in the attack, including the sexual violence. And this gives a solution in attacks that are made by a mass, that are aimed to dehumanize and to harm and to terrorize. And this is a valid solution that helps the difficulty of linking perpetrator and victim. The second point is, as I said, that conflict-related sexual violence is different from sexual violence that is aimed at the individual. Because the attack occurs outdoors and not indoors, and because most times attack occurs during war, so the arena is not the usual crime scene that we know, but a war zone, and we cannot get forensic findings from the arena, and also because of silencing of the victims and the survivors. And what we offer is to look at things. We know that conflict-related sexual violence is aimed not just at the individual, but at the community. And in order to instill fear, to terrorize the community, and to harm the core of the community, which is the sexual component, then sexual violence is often perpetrated outdoors, in front of eyewitnesses and people who see rape and sexual violence and hear rape and sexual violence. So even if there are not direct survivors that testify on what happened to them, there are plenty of witnesses that saw or heard sexual violence. Also, we're using patterns that are found in arenas of sexual violence to prove systematically, to prove premeditation, to prove other forms that is difficult to prove because, as I said, in most cases of sexual violence, as a weapon of war, we cannot find directives to use the violence as systematic or directive for premeditation. And this can be found if we're analyzing scenes and looking at patterns in scenes. And when we see, by the way, like October 7th, that in 6 arenas there is widespread sexual violence and the distinctions, the characteristic of each crime is very distinct and very similar to other arenas, then the conclusion, the imminent conclusion is that it's not something random. This is not something that some terrorists decided to do, but a result of a systematic attack.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon. Much appreciated. Victoria, I'll come back to you with a follow-up question later if there is time. Right now, I'm going to introduce Emily Maltman, who has served as a British diplomat for over 20 years in various roles, working mostly in conflict-affected and fragile states and on national security. Most recently, she was Her Majesty's ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo. She was appointed ambassador after 5 years in Beirut as head of the UK Syria Overseas Network. My question to you, Emily, is the UK has been a global pioneer in the field since the launch of the Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict Initiative, PSVI, in 2012. Could you walk us through the core focus of this initiative and how it has evolved over the years? Specifically, what significant changes has the PSVI brought to the international arena in terms of breaking the stigma surrounding CRSV and shifting the global approach from hidden shame to active accountability and prevention?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and share a little bit from a government perspective. But just to reiterate from the UK view, we can't do this without civil society or survivors. So I'm really honored to speak from a government perspective, but it's really the critical voices and roles and actions that you play as civil society and survivors that can help governments try to do this and do it right. So a little bit about the UK's Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative, which our Foreign Secretary, our Foreign Minister in 2012 launched, William Hague. He, as a man, as a foreign minister, with a little bit of advice and support from some women, was convinced and persuaded that this is a foreign policy issue. And so he decided to launch the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative as a UK landmark flagship initiative that would survive successive governments, which it has done. It's still existing today. We're still working on this today. And he said, I'm a man. I am going to talk about this too. And I'm going to talk about it at foreign policy tables around the world. So he took it to the G7, to the Security Council, wherever you can think of. And I think that's important to remember because that is part of breaking the silence. It's about everybody talking about it. And I think what the initiative was trying to do from the very beginning was start to break the silence and to allow and support others who are not survivors to start to understand and to start to have the tools to talk about it and to support the survivors to break that silence and break that cycle of stigma and shame. So the initiative, it's called the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative because it has prevention at its heart, but it's the hardest thing to do because in reality, sexual violence is used in every conflict and it has been forever. So nobody, no country, no armed force, no armed actor is immune. It happens and has happened everywhere. The key is how do we prevent it? So we also partner with our Ministry of Defense about how do our defense actors play their part in prevention. But we also want to respond and support survivors to access the services they need. And we want to recognize survivors. And so a big part of our initiative has been around putting survivors first. We talk about a survivor-centered approach, and many others have talked about that today. And that's important in terms of ending impunity too. We published a public strategy in 2023 which articulates some of this, but effectively 10 years later it articulated the same strategy. Effectively we have to keep going on prevention, breaking the stigma, responding and recognizing and putting survivors at the center. And we're actually going through a process now of refreshing our strategy, and guess what? It's also about breaking the silence, breaking the stigma. It's about prevention, it's about responding, and it's about recognizing survivors and ending impunity. So just to say a little bit more about on justice as one aspect of this. So, and it's interesting in terms of what's been mentioned so far. So we have been able to support various forms of justice at that international and national level. And those can be against individuals, they can be against groups, or they can be against the commanders. There are legal systems and laws available for national and international actors to use those laws to hold individuals, groups, or commanders accountable. So in DRC, for example, in 2023, the first Congolese court held the commander of an armed group accountable for rape by his troops. He didn't do it himself. There was no evidence that he had done so, but his troops had, his soldiers. So that is possible. We've also worked in Guinea, Kenya, Uganda for crimes against humanity. We also have worked very closely with Colombia in their special jurisdiction, worked with Kosovo in their now national program addressing CRSV from the 1999 war, and also in Bosnia and Iraq. So each context is a little bit different, but the laws are there. There are examples from lots of different contexts which can be used and considered at the national level and also potentially at the international level. And of course, we work very closely with our Ukrainian partners and in terms of how Ukraine, both at that national and international level, can seek to support justice and accountability. And what Ukraine has managed to do in a very short space of time in terms of the legal reform and the legal mechanisms that they need at the national level to look at this has been exceptional. But just to say, cases don't come out of thin air. It's got to be also about who is involved in that process. And so we'll come on to this, but there's a lot to be done in terms of thinking, not just about that national legal framework, but all of the actors in a justice system and the survivors that are key to this that can make that successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amelie. I will have a follow-up question for you, but at the moment I'm going to introduce Erin Farrell Rosenberg, who is the Senior Legal and Policy Advisor for the Dr. Dennis Mukwege, did I say that right? Yes. Okay, Mukwege Foundation. Since 2021, she has led the Mukwege Foundation's Red Line Initiative, focusing on state responsibility for preventing, prosecuting, and responding to conflict-related sexual violence. So my main question to you, Erin, is that your work with the Mukwege Foundation's Red Line Initiative challenges the common perception that we lack the legal tools to fight CRSV. You argue that the issue isn't a lack of law, but rather that existing international law is fragmented and poorly implemented. Could you introduce us to the guidebook on state obligations? How does this tool help shift the focus from individual criminal liability to broader state responsibility? And how can it empower survivors to move from being victims to becoming advocates for their own rights? It's on.
Oh. Thank you so much for this question, and I want to thank everyone in the room for taking the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to be here for this conversation. And of course, thank you to the organizers, Ruth and the Dina Project. So yes, I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, actually. But it actually is not different, because justice and accountability and individual criminal liability are a subset of state responsibilities. But first, let me just explain what the Red Line Initiative is of the Mukwege Foundation. The Red Line Initiative is rooted in the belief that sexual violence and conflict can be prevented. And that for it to be prevented, it must be prioritized as a wholly unacceptable tactic of warfare. And so we have 3 aims at the Red Line Initiative: evoking a moral rejection and outcry against the use of conflict-related sexual violence. That's work at the community, social, general population level. Strengthening and clarifying the legal obligations of states to prohibit the use of sexual violence, prevent and punish it, and of states to repair the harm when it does occur. So that is a very legal aspect. And our targets are much more the legal community and states themselves. And finally, build political will to ensure a more robust and timely response from states. And so that's an important part of international law. You might hear people say international law is not real. Sometimes that's a very blunt thing that's said. But what that actually is about is that international law, unlike national systems, has an aspect of political will that is required for it to be enforced. So that's the third part of the Red Line Initiative. You asked me about the guidebook. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of where the guidebook comes from. The Mukwege Foundation supports SEMA, the Global Survivor Network of conflict-related sexual violence. And SEMA, one of the things we do is we host retreats. The global retreat in 2022 of SEMA, they asked, so these are survivors of conflict-related sexual violence from all over the world, asked the Red Line Initiative to focus on the responsibility of states as opposed to only individual perpetrators. Why would survivors ask for this? It's because it is not that criminal responsibility is not important, it is. But to have a trial, to have a proper investigation, whose responsibility is that for someone to be convicted? It is the state's obligation to ensure that domestic laws are in place that allow for prosecution. It is the state's obligation to ensure that there is the funding and the human resources for an effective investigation, to ensure that the rule of law exists, to ensure that there is an independent judiciary, to have trials. So already we can actually see that criminal liability is a product of states actually carrying out their obligations. When we talk about preventing conflict-related sexual violence, that is not the obligation, and it is not something that an individual can do. It is something that governments must do. Only governments can take the actions that are needed to effectively prevent conflict-related sexual violence, not individual actors. So that's why we focus on state obligations. We took that request and we did a bunch of research. So this is back in 2022. Because we first thought, well, maybe there's no law. There's no convention on conflict-related sexual violence. There's a convention against torture. There's a convention on the rights of the child. So that was our first starting point. What we found is that contrary to the notion that there is a gap in the law, in the legal architecture, that actually there is an incredibly robust set of international obligations that already exist that regulate all aspects of state obligations, but that the problem is that they are divided across different legal frameworks and are inaccessible. Inaccessible to governments themselves, inaccessible to civil society, and inaccessible, most specifically, to survivors themselves. So we came up with a solution that we proposed to the United Kingdom and the PSVI, which was to create the guidebook on state obligations for conflict-related sexual violence. The guidebook contains over 400 pages, if you were to print it. It covers obligations of states under international humanitarian law. the Geneva Conventions, customary international law, international human rights law, which is a completely different body of law, regional human rights law. Ukraine is also covered by the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights. And finally, the UN Security Council resolutions under the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. The guidebook can be found at endcrsv.org. Each chapter sets out the obligations of states under the thematic area of prevention, justice and accountability, response, and reparations. I know we're running out of time, so what I want to say in terms of how this works with survivors is that what we do, in a nutshell, is now that the guidebook exists, we are transforming the guidebook into tools for survivors to use themselves. What that means, our partner EURFEM did this in Ukraine, is that the obligations that a state has, we conduct a detailed legal analysis to see where are the gaps at the domestic level. We then do workshops with survivors from that country where we engage with them on what are the legal and implementation gaps, and what are your priorities. From that, the survivors themselves create what is called a call to action. This is contextualized to their country, their situation, their needs. But their demands are not requests of their government. They're not asking their government to do something nice. They're asking their government to comply with the law. And that's the difference, is that underpinning the call to action is the actual law that establishes an existing obligation of the state to carry out those actions. It is a way of addressing the imbalance of power between a survivor and their government. So I guess what I would conclude with is just to say that the importance of states assuming their obligations to their own citizens, of ensuring that every survivor of conflict-related sexual violence receives the holistic care that is necessary, that there are trauma-based, trained counselors working with them, that the state is investing in real services to survivors, to their families, and most importantly, that states take seriously their obligations to prevent their own citizens suffering conflict-related sexual violence in the first place. That this is ultimately, in our view, capturing within it criminal proceedings and justice and accountability, the broader framework that needs to be implemented in order to truly end conflict-related sexual violence as the scourge of humanity that we know it to be today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. So now, in the interest of time, I have a follow-up question for each one of you. The questions are long, but it would be great if you could keep your answers short so that we can maybe squeeze in some time for questions from the audience. I'm trying to keep this on time as much as I can. So Victoria, your follow-up question is, beyond standard criminal proceedings, you emphasize the importance of non-judicial mechanisms and repartitions. Based on your experience in the Ukraine, why is international recognition so vital for survivors? And in what practical ways can the international community support the reparation mechanisms you are currently promoting?
Thank you for this question. I will try, even I promise, to be short. So really, reparations for CRC survivors today in Ukraine is key element of justice too, and Ukraine is really actively working in this direction despite the active war phase we have today. Last year, special law about reparations to CRSV survivors successfully was adopted and came into force. However, despite this fact, the legal framework to implement this law is still developing in Ukraine. And one of the urgent issues is a question of funding, of course. And the use of frozen Russian assets would be very helpful in this, because we cannot wait for the end of the war, because people need support now. Also, in late of October of the last year of 2025, the Global Survivors Fund, the GSF, together with other organizations, called on the European Union to dedicate a share of the loan for Ukraine supported by frozen Russian assets to pay reparations to survivors of CRSV and other human rights violations. So we really are looking forward to this step and to use of the frozen Russian assets to make this possible to pay the compensation also for CRSV survivors in Ukraine. One more thing, also, as you may know, we have the International Register of Damage caused by aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. It was established to collect application for the compensation of damage, loss or injury caused by Russian Federation against Ukraine, but since February 24 of 2022. So on one hand, this is an excellent example of international mechanism, but many survivors find it unfair that the register records information about damage and about CRSV just after the beginning of the full-scale invasion and not from 2013. So for now, it's also important to make it possible to collect the information about crimes after 2013. And in December of the last year, Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs, signed on behalf of Ukraine the convention establishing an International Claims Commission for Ukraine as an independent international body within the institutional system of the Council of Europe. The Compensation Commission will operate on the basis of the second element of the international compensation mechanism, the register of damage, which I mentioned earlier, and it's also a very important step for Ukraine, and we're really looking for other countries to support us in this direction. And the last thing which I want to share with you, so it's really important for international institutions give priority to CRSV crimes, because this is essential for ensuring, of course, justice on the international level, but also because it's about international architecture, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world security system.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Emily, your follow-up question is that one of the most practical tools is the support for practitioners on the ground, such as the International Protocol and the Murad Code. How do these frameworks ensure that the documentation of crimes, which is so vital for future prosecutions, is done in a way that prioritizes the dignity and safety of the survivors above all else?
Thank you. Yes, I hinted at this already, that we can have the laws in place and a justice system ready, but how do we make sure that that actually leads to prosecutions and accountability? So that challenge led us to develop this international protocol on documentation and investigation of sexual violence in conflict. And the main aim was to try to develop a global standard that all actors doing documentation and or investigation of sexual violence could use by putting the survivor first. This is about understanding that survivors are traumatized, that survivors need to get their agency back. And that means thinking about how to specifically investigate and document in a survivor-centered and trauma-informed way. And we've done lots of learning. We developed the protocol in 2014, and then shared it and did trainings, and then we kept doing different kinds of reviews to learn. And it's a learning process, because I think that in reality, and I think somebody said this earlier, we're in 2026 still talking about this, and sometimes it still feels very new. But we are where we are, and we can keep learning. And the different contexts around the world have different things to bring to each other context. Like I said, it happens and has happened everywhere in every conflict. It has been documented. The levels of accountability are atrocious. I mean, even the Second World War by their allies. We have to try to do better, and all we can do when we learn and we recognize survivors is do better and do better for the future. So the Murad Code built on the protocol and really tried to help those that are doing documentation and investigations to think about and understand who are survivors. Police or forensic medical examiners, they're not necessarily they don't know, and if in a new conflict context, how would they? So the Murad Code, which you can find at muradcode.org, developed a survivor's perspectives for those gathering and using information about systematic and conflict-related sexual violence. It's all available online in a bunch of different languages, and I even have a few of these here in some different languages. But it's a very easy-to-use guide, and it tells the story from the survivor perspective to help inform investigators. It says documenters should have knowledge in what they are researching. Sometimes we are the ones informing them. So it's not because police or forensic examiners or prosecutors or lawyers or judges don't care. They maybe just don't know. So let's help them. And then let's also help the survivors. Maybe a survivor has never got anywhere near an investigative process. So how do they know how the police work? What is a medical forensic examiner? What is a judge? What is a courtroom? What does that look like? So we also, the Murad Code also created a guide, 10 important things to remember for the survivor. And again, I have this in lots of different languages here. And it's things like, you are in charge. You can stop the interview. You can think of ways to stay comfortable. You can think of how you can stay safe and confidential. What are your options? And it's just helping survivors think, okay, I'm in charge. How do I use this process? When do I use this process? When do I want to engage? And so these sorts of tools and some of the things that Erin has mentioned too, we've developed, those working on this for a number of years have developed from lots of different contexts and keep wanting to share it with any other context, any other survivors in civil society who want to try to do better by survivors today and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one last quick follow-up question, Erin. Based on your case studies in Uganda and Ukraine, you've identified an air gap between high-level policy and frontline implementation. Where do you see the biggest gaps with respect to justice and accountability obligations?
Well, it's the same. So I'm actually going to just very, very briefly explain the gap in Uganda, what came out of our legal and implementation gap analysis, and what the survivors themselves identified as their priority. So we held the survivor-led workshops, and what they identified as the single biggest advocacy issue they wanted to focus on was birth registration and identity documentation for children born of wartime rape. Now, and that's because in a patrilineal system, particularly when you're talking about land, for example, and various inheritance rights, if you don't know who your father is because your mother was raped, you have actually a problem in terms of administratively doing any number of things, right? So what's the situation? In Uganda, there's actually, the government has issued a directive and it's a national directive, explicitly on this issue. So the law exists, the secondary legislation exists, but at the local level, it's not being implemented across the board. Why is that? Limited awareness by your frontline actual people implementing it at the regional and local level. Second, administrative barriers. And third, cultural resistance within various parts of the country. So this is also what we actually see in terms of justice and accountability, in terms of what we mean by the gap. So I wanted to use that to sort of highlight this, that because Ukraine is also an example of this extraordinary compliance with almost all of the legal frameworks, but also from in terms of domestication. But where you have a gap is ensuring that all of that gets to the frontline commanders, to the service providers, and that it's actually being implemented. So this is, in terms of justice and accountability, that's what I would really say is that what is really important is that you have really detailed implementation analyses where you can target at the specific institution, specific investigator, office, et cetera, institution level. It's not the case that there are really a huge number of countries that just don't have law. That is not the situation. The only one, I do want to say just one other thing, is that in terms of justice and accountability, to remember that reparations is a part of what justice means. It's actually really important that countries put in place laws relevant to reparations prior to the occurrence of atrocity crimes. Otherwise, you have a problem when it actually occurs with your legal framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A right now. But please stay for the reception. There's nothing better than conversation over food and drink, and you can talk to all the panelists. I just want to leave you with one thought before I hand over to Richard for those closing remarks, that today's dialogue is not an endpoint. It is a beginning. And I coined this term, which I see, that courage is the currency of reform. And today I see courage. In all the panelists, I see the will to bring about change, so that change will happen. Thank you all so much, and now over to Richard.
Thank you, Rahel. This brings our program to a close. I think everyone would agree that the day was very, it was disturbing, but very informative and important to hear. I'd like to thank the Czech mission and the partners for co-sponsoring the event, the speakers for participating, and now we can go join the reception.
Excuse me, Richard?
Sure.
I do have